Welcome to Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Story Talks is produced by Narativ, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Story Talks, a podcast that addresses the ways that businesses engage their employees and customers. I'm Jerome DeRoy, and with me today, as always, is my co-host, Julianne Ryan. And we are always interested in how storytelling and listening practices can help increase engagement. So leaders have many opportunities to engage their stakeholders, including their own origin story, which is often used as a way of describing the company's mission, its vision, and its purpose. So today, we've got a really special guest. I'm very excited. And that is someone with a powerful origin story that I met through an engagement through the Swiss consulate. And her name is Penny Schiffer, and she's the CEO of Raized, a company that uses AI to make venture capital more intelligent, data-driven, and automated, helping VCs focus on what matters most. So welcome, Penny.
Hi, great to be here.
Thank you.
Penny, so nice to meet you. We are very curious, and I know I'm curious to find out a little bit more about your role and your work. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so yeah, I'm a CEO and co-founder of a startup company. So we are a tech company. We develop a solution that helps venture capitalists to identify the best startups and validate them for an investment. And it's really a journey to build a tech company in going really deep and building something unique that hasn't been there before.
So how does someone in your position now, how did you get there? Like, what was the what was the motivation to, I mean, my understanding is that, you were a venture capitalist yourself. And so I can see the relationship and the expertise there. But I'm curious on a personal level, what made you say, I'm going to move from being a venture capitalist to actually providing a service to venture capitalists?
Sure. The most important day actually was when I flew to San Francisco to give a talk about the Swiss startup ecosystem at Stanford. And on the plane, I met with a guy who was building his own AI firm in the fintech space. And, it's a long flight. I tend to not sleep, it's still daytime. So, you start to talk and you get to know each other, and he would share a bit what he did. And it really got me thinking about how can it be that we as investors are so kind of old-fashioned or so little using the new technologies to make our own business better while we invest in companies that make other people's lives better. And it was really that it struck me on the flight that this is what I wanted to do. So it was really fortunate that I could use the time in San Francisco to go and talk to a couple of investors and potential customers and people who know the space about this idea, get their input, and make even a stronger conviction that I wanted to explore and build a solution that can help us VCs to become better VCs. It's really, now that I talk about it, I really remember this moment so vividly. And that was the starting point, almost like an inception point.
It's interesting that inception point, so many times, and I mentioned this in my introduction, that there's the CEO of a startup or the founder of a startup is associated with a particular moment, right? And the moment that you had the idea, that you came up with it. And in your case, it's very true. I mean, you really, there was a moment for you, and it was on a plane with a stranger. And, it's a very compelling story in terms of the fact that it is a story. It has all the elements, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of movies and read a lot of novels where it begins with two people on a journey somewhere, and they strike up a conversation, and then you had an idea that came from there. And I'm curious, in terms of that idea, going from having the idea to then actually doing it. What was that process like? Did a lot of time go by, or was it almost kind of like a month later, Raized was born, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so I was still in my corporate role.
Mm.
And as part of that role, I was given some time to do entrepreneurship activities. So I started my own program. At the time, I was actually running this entrepreneurship program as a team leader, but then I took part in the program as a participant. And this is how I could validate the idea more, how I had the chance to, yeah, think about a first prototype. I mean, it didn't get me very far in terms of building, but it got me far in strengthening the conviction and creating a network of people who are interested and who I could, share my ideas with and get feedback from. And I just wanted to come back to the analogy that you have given about falling in love, right? So I think this is when you meant. And, sometimes I meet people who are also interested in this idea and they haven't built anything yet, or they are just exploring the idea. And on the one hand, I envy them, and also I don't envy them because they are still in the complete honeymoon phase of this idea. So they think the sky is the limit. You can do anything with data. It's completely easy. They have brilliant ideas, and I was the same. But now that we have built something, we are very proud of what we have achieved. And at the same time, we are not in the honeymoon phase with the topic anymore, because we know that there are so many things you cannot do, or you can only do with unreasonable efforts and cost involved, so that we are now more mature in the relationship. Let's say the idea and myself, we have now a very mature, strong relationship, but it's not the blind honeymoon phase anymore. And sometimes I meet people who are still in the honeymoon, and I envy them for what they don't know, because they can still naively talk about what they're going to do with data to make VC better. And I know that they won't do all these things, but they will do different things, if any.
Yeah. That's so interesting. These, that's kind of what I was curious about is these different phases, of the life of a startup, and I love the way you just portrayed it in terms of this honeymoon phase, and I think that's so true of anyone, right? Even when we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, but also people who are executives in corporations, and simply working on a presentation, for next week for their boss or for their stakeholders. And there's, it's the same thing when they come up with an idea. It's sort of like, okay, there's all this excitement, and then you have to actually put it together. You have to figure out what is that story and how do we put it in, and what are the visuals, what are all the things that go with it. So I think what you're the point you're making is true for a lot of things, but especially probably in the startup world. Yeah.
I was curious, because you're working in the AI footprint, that when you've been doing the venture capital work you've been doing all these years, you've been actively listening and observing your potential investment companies in a very unique way that's all in your brain, right? And I'm curious how you were able to bring that into your AI work, like your way of listening and questioning, and part financial, part intuitive. How does that show up in your work, in your ability to create a new story for them?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think our company and the product only kicked off once we were able to combine the subject matter expertise with the technical and AI expertise. So what we are doing here essentially is we are putting subject matter thinking and decision making, or decision preparation, we are putting this in an automated, scalable way. I give you one example. So when you think of how a VC would look at an early stage company, maybe seed or pre-seed, like very early, they oftentimes look at the founders and the founder team composition. And there is a few things that most people would do that are possible to replicate in a data solution. For example, you would go and check, are the people actually working full-time on the company, or is it a side project? Or has it been a side project for a long time? So if it's just a recent thing, I think many VCs would think that they can go full time, but if they have been doing it for 3 years as a side project, it may not have the traction or it may not be
Mm-hmm.
an active project. Or another thing is you would look at, okay, what have the people done in the past? Like, do they probably bring the skills or have they done something similar? Are they serial entrepreneurs, for example?
Mm-hmm.
So this is something you can also check on, an automated way. Because you know what you're looking for. So we have
Mm-hmm.
always taken the subject matter expertise and tried to put it into variables and into a way that a machine can read and assess it, knowing that this is a simplification and that this cannot replace the decision-making process completely, but it can help you focus your attention on the
Mm-hmm.
companies that look more promising. So
Mm-hmm.
the subject matter expertise actually is the starting point, and then putting it into a data sciencey way to assess it is then the follow-on, and it's not the starting point.
Mm. Terrific. Thank you.
It's interesting, the how how does that blend of decision making and data oriented approach, how do they kind of come together here? And so it's interesting that you start, with that essentially, and then it's the data, the science behind it comes to support it essentially. And I'm wondering, one of the things that I remember from one of our early conversations, Penny, is how do you uh, attract people towards this, coming from where you come from? And I would imagine, some degree of resistance, because it sounds very, I mean, it is very innovative what you're doing. And certainly what I know from venture capitalism and what I
Mhm.
might read, and, the kind of famous startups, et cetera, and that process, it does seem to be a very, and it's even been said that it's fairly non-equitable, that it's not necessarily a very fair process. It really depends on individuals who have a hunch about someone, and then they'll be inspired. I'll always remember the description of the person who invested in Instagram and said about the founder of Instagram that it's when they looked at that person, it's like that person could see right through them and into the future, and so it
Mhm.
has this sort of magical quality to it of like, wow, how do you know that? And how does
Yeah.
that happen? What kind of person is that? And based on that, and I'm sure a lot of other things, they decide to put millions of dollars in it. And so I'm wondering, when you came up with that idea and started to present it, there's how did you attract people towards this and kind of get through perhaps that, what I'm imagining what might have been some resistance from people to say, no, I'm the oracle, I know
Yeah.
all, and I have a special nose for
Mhm.
these things.
Well, the sourcing process is really like a funnel. And when you think of a company wants to make 10 investments, let's say in a given year, they would have to look at 1,000 companies overall. They will not look at all the companies in detail, but that's typically a ratio of companies that they would have to source in order to make 10 amazing investments. Now, the question is, are we selecting the 10? Of course, we don't, but we can help you to go from, let's say, 1,000 to 500 that are, not even investable for whatever reason. Maybe it's not an active company, or, it doesn't even fit your mandate. So we can help you exclude those. And then from the remaining 500, we can tell you which ones look more promising and where you should start evaluating. We cannot help you find, your decision making and, replace this gut feeling. And you are right, in the very early phases, in the seed and pre-seed phase, it's a lot about the people because there's nothing else or not a lot you can assess. While in the later stages, when it comes to a Series A and beyond, there is a lot of stuff that you can assess, and there is a lot of facts you will evaluate, and it's a different type of investor. But for the early stages, we can help you focus your attention on the companies that matter the most, and we can help you extend your funnel. Let's say you look maybe at 1,000 only, we can help you look at 5,000 without hiring so many analysts. But we really don't think that we can and should replace this element that you said, a very integrative approach of assessing companies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. That makes sense. Support, and also you're broadening the pool for people.
Yes,
That
and
does
it's a
sound.
time perspective. We can help you see a company earlier than someone else. So it may not just be that you know of the company, but you know of the company 3 months earlier. And the maturity of our customers is very different, current customers, but also potential ones. So in the US, you even have a lot of funds that don't want to see early companies, but they want to see people who might start a company in the coming weeks. So they want to see employees of the big tech companies that have something in their profile or that leave traces of they might be interested in starting a company. So it goes that early. While there is also a lot of investors who want to see early companies per se, and then there is also prospects that only want to see the validated companies and projects, even though it means that they will be a little later and that they will not look at the full number, but they don't have the capacity to go through hundreds or thousands of companies, but they only want to see less, although they know that this will make them not see all the potential companies, but just a selection. So it's also a question of how mature as an investment firm you are and what you can and want to digest to get a competitive advantage.
It's really fascinating how this all works, and it makes so much sense to me that this would be coming to venture capitalists. But it sounds like it took a while to get there, and you had to do it. So good for you. And so I'm curious from your perspective, because we are all about storytelling here, and we like to talk about the value of storytelling in business and in different sectors, and in different kind of ways. And I'm curious for you, given that you've got this, these two perspectives, one from an investor perspective and the other one from an actual CEO of a startup. Where do you see the value of storytelling? Let's start maybe as an investor. When you were a venture capitalist, was that part of the equation for you in terms, and how would you even define that? I'm curious always, because we all have different definitions of what a story is, but was that something that you were aware of in your own kind of field as a venture capitalist?
That's a very good question. And it's really hard to say. And as I've been to the US just lately, I have to say that there is a very different approach to the storytelling field. So many people in the US, they ask really about a long-term vision and what is the end game. So they want to understand where this could go. If everything goes well, if you can build what you want to build, what are you actually building in 5 to 10 years? On the other hand, many people that I have talked to before, the European investors or the people I'm closer to here in Europe, many of them want to understand what you have actually achieved right now. So what are the KPIs? What is the revenues? What is the user numbers? Like, what is your past achievements? They don't want to hear so much about your dreams and vision. It's interesting, but only mildly. While on the contrary, sometimes in the US, this can be not of interest, but it's much more about what you actually want to build and how big, how amazing this can be. And this is really interesting and funny in a way, because it can be very different here. And I would also say that there is in pitching a company, sometimes there is an over exaggerating of this magic pitch, like the 3-minute pitch on stage, versus being able to tell in more detail when you actually have a call with someone who knows about it, what you are actually doing. And I can totally confirm that this is not always the best idea to only train for a stage performance when you don't have an idea how you want to take the next step and what is going to happen in this next call. And that's something that I find is easier for mentors to train for, but it's not enough when you are fundraising. You also have to go to the next level and be convincing there, but this is less structured and this is less stage, but it's more being you, and it's more you have to lead the conversation.
When you were saying that, I was thinking that we tend to train for the big Hollywood moment over here, you know. It's
True.
like they're already writing the script for when it comes out in the movie form, how the company started. So yes, it's always a little bit more dramatic and salesy on that aspect. But I think that's true. It's big knowledge happens in smaller conversations too, about, you know, getting down to it, and it's not all pitch perfect. It's about sharing thoughts and letting that conversation guide what you can do. So,
Mm.
thanks.
Maybe I can also share with you another story that I found funny myself. So I'd say as a company, as what we are building, we really could kick off once we took the whole data piece more into our hands and didn't think that there is going to be external people who can do data science magic, but that we actually, my co-founder and I, had to build the pipeline more or less ourselves and get really deeply involved. And I've really got back to understanding that my initial degree in statistics was a huge help because, you know, I did psychology, but half of it is statistics. And it took me a while to understand how this translates in the modern machine learning jargon, but it has totally the same roots. And when I
Mm-hmm.
realized this, I felt much more comfortable. I could join the discussions more. I could guide more what we were doing. And it came to the point that at some point I felt so grateful for this teacher I had in university who was a professor of mathematics. And at the time it was really, really tough. But he taught us so much that I called him in the summer and told him, look, I'm so grateful, Gunther, for what you told us. And, you know, I can use this so much. And, you know, although it was hard at the time, I'm completely thankful for what you did. And he was kind of moved and I was moved. It was really amazing. And I meant it that way because only since I understood that I can do it, I can understand it, I can get into it, only then the whole discussions and everything became much more clear. And I was more able to take the decisions in the data science field than before when I thought it would be technical experts who would be doing it. And I
Mm.
can totally remember this summer day when I talked to him on the phone, and we were both like, "Ah, this is so unexpected and so much later than he thought it would be." And for me, the same. And
Yeah.
then
Oh,
he sent
wonderful.
me 5 books, you know, that he had written in the meantime. But guess what? You know, I don't read that many books anymore. So I read, you know, blog posts and what's data science and all of that. And the books are sitting here. It's really sad. You know, he wanted to help me, but I couldn't digest the books. They were so big.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's great though because you know it's interesting. So we started this podcast, this episode today, um, with you know a three-line description of who you are, which I said, which is the traditional way of doing things. Then Julianne asked you about you know what do you do in your role, and we got another version. And then you know I think I asked another question, and then we you know there was this kind of moment in the airplane, etc. And now we learn about this professor that, in my mind, what it does as well, and what it seems like it did for you, very authentically, you know, you became you authorized yourself almost, if that makes sense, in that
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
moment of sort of seeing, wow, you know, I actually know this stuff because I was taught this stuff by a particular individual, and I went to school for it, and you know, I got a degree, and so it's really fascinating to me the different layers, and that to me, and I'm saying this as much for us as for our listeners, is that everything is fair game in terms of your story. You know, that part, you going to school to study statistics and meet this professor and have, you know, this knowledge, it allowed you to have a special knowledge for this particular venture. And also what it does for me as an audience and potentially as an investor, it's sort of, wow, you know, this person knows what she's doing. It's not just that she had an idea. And it kind of goes back to what you were just saying about the difference, right, between what you've seen in the US and in Europe. But I think what's true everywhere is that, yes, there's that Hollywood moment, like you were saying, Julianne, you know, those 3 minutes on stage. Wow, fantastic. But then you have to meet with the people And you have to go into the details because nobody signs on based on 3 minutes on stage. You know, as much as we would like to think that, nobody does that. And so it's sort of similar, you know, you have to be able to look back into your own experiences and be ready for those conversations. And to me, you finding that moment and realizing yourself as you were building this product that you studied this, you know this, it's like, you know, that's what's going to authorize you in those later conversations. And I think too often people kind of forget about that a little bit. They forget about these mundane details of what they've done, but it's all valid.
I was thinking of it like this statistics when you had that aha moment, it became like your Rosetta Stone. So who knew that when Gunther was putting you through your paces, that was going to be your secret tool, you know, years later when you're thinking, okay, just let me get through this. It was statistics was never my favorite in
No,
any shape
actually,
or form.
I have to say it was my favorite
Oh, not
actually.
me.
I loved it, you know, but I didn't use it for a long time. And then it became all technical, you know. In machine learning, you use very different terms for the same thing. And this was
Yeah.
hiding that I could translate it.
But it was the connection of translating that in between one, and why I use the word Rosetta Stone. It's like, wait, I have that language. I'm just not been speaking. You know, there's things in common here, and I think that's the beauty of any kind of storytelling when we figure out that we have some connection there and we can
Mm.
decipher it.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I think is and what Julian was saying, you know, in terms of that sort of, you know, when you come to that moment of there's a you go into a little bit more detail about your experience, and then you guys were talking about the professor and statistics and how it authorizes you and all of that. And I think to me that's part of the story. And there's the first flashy story, like the Hollywood moment, and then after that you have the meetings, and maybe that's when a story like that comes up as a way of authorizing you, really. But more importantly, it sounds like for you it was a moment of I can do this kind of thing. That's how I received it, you know, and I'm prepared for this. So that's kind of fascinating where that's going to come from. And I think too many times people sort of forget those moments. And as a result, as an audience member, you don't get the benefit of that because there's a lot of information that gets gleaned from these moments that we were when we were in school or when our childhood that sort of show who we are really. And that's the authenticity that I think is so key. But my
Mm-hmm.
question now is more about for your, you know, today, where you are now in your company. Where do you see? We talked about, you know, the value of storytelling for investors and the differences between Europe and the U.S. And I'm wondering for you in this moment, is there a place as you're going into meetings for storytelling where you see that it helps your messaging in terms of where you started, and how you got to where you are now? Or is it all about the data and the demonstration? Or is it a little bit of both? Like what do you see?
Well, it depends really. So when I talk to potential investors, there is very different styles and there is very different knowledge of the field. So in some conversations, we have to go really deep about how did we build the data pipeline, what other data sources could we use, you know, how is this all configured, and what are our next steps in terms of the technical roadmap. But then in other conversations, it's more about, do we believe that the market is big enough? And it can be even funny. Sometimes there is this question of, okay, how much are you charging for the service? And then because the people I talk to could be customers and they could be investors, I have to ask them a question. Are you thinking about it as customers or as investors? Because investors want to buy into an expensive product that can generate, you know, tens of thousands of revenues per year or month even. While customers want to have good value for money, right? So they would like to get something kind of, reasonably priced, or, you know, they assess their own ability to pay. And this is a very different way how you would phrase it and how you would put it. So, you know, I sometimes take it with a grain of salt and ask them, so what do you want to hear? Are you thinking about it as you being the customers or you being the investors, so that I make them understand that they may have a different idea of what is a good price. Should I sell an expensive product or should I sell a not so expensive product?
Wow, that's a great perspective. Well, I certainly have taken away some best practices here that I'm eager to share with our audience. But I'm wondering, Julian, if you have any other thoughts or reflections on what Penny told us today.
Well, first of all, it's just a proof of conversation and questions and learning about story is a way to really explore areas that I know I didn't have a lot of knowledge. I did research for venture capitalists years and years ago, but the whole AI is a whole new world, and it's using the same principles: show up, trust in the process, and be patient, to do a lot of listening to form the connection and build your knowledge base. So that's always the mantra to keep reminding myself when I'm in new territory. And I'm glad to meet someone who actually loves statistics in class. So there's something for everyone.
That's great. And just what I wanted to add as we usually wrap up, Penny, with a few best practices that we've heard so that our listeners can take that away and start to implement some of them. But I think this last point that you made around your audiences and asking them the question, who are you being? Are you coming from the perspective of the customer or the investor or both maybe? But just so that you, as the person who's pitching and presenting and having a dialogue, how to relate to each of those. And so I think for our listeners, that preparation in terms of who is my audience, who are the different types of audience, and then if I'm not sure in the moment, why not ask? Why not ask? And I think that really opens something up.
Sure.
That's really from that listening perspective, I think is so important, because that's going to inform which story you're going to tell. And I think the second point is if you are going to tell a story, then really remember those moments, that authorize you, that kind of legitimize not just your service or product, but even who you are and why you're the best person to do that. Because again, we see often that we rely too much on the product and the service, and we forget about our own personal experiences. And I think your anecdote about the professor and the statistics, degree were really illuminating around that. So those are my takeaways for our audience today. I don't know if you have anything else that you might take away, Penny, from this, or that you would want our listeners to know about.
My takeaway is to use more storytelling, even when it's a lot about the product and the technical stuff. I will do it even more. I like to do it. I think it can be entertaining, and every interaction should also have built a relation. So it's always good to be trying to entertain to a certain extent. And I think stories are a great way to do it. So I will use this even more, or try to build on it. Thank you for reminding me of that and giving me an idea about it, of my own stories in the end.
Great.
Terrific.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks, Julianne, once more for being here with us, and Penny for coming on today. Really appreciated the conversation. So this episode is going to be out at a particular date, which everyone will know about. And once it's released, it's available on SoundCloud and everywhere people find podcasts. It's called StoryTalks, and you can find out more about StoryTalks and a lot of other things around storytelling and listening on our website, narativ.com, narativ.com. And there you'll see a lot of things about myself and Julianne Ryan as well, and all of our colleagues who do all this work. So that's where you can learn more. And again, really, really happy to have you on, and thank you so much. And everyone who's listening, until next time, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Narativ StoryTalks. For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narativ.com.